another episode of 10xMarketer podcast. How PPC as an industry would look like in 2025. I'm not sure, but I definitely try to find that answer in this episode with Navah Hopkins and Fred Wallace. Both are from Optimizer, and according to me, are most suitable person in industry to answer this question. We discussed how PPC would look like in 2025 and beyond. Fred is an AI wizard and he shared some great insights on how things are going to shape in near future, what changes will happen on PPC front, PMax, landing page, and how AI is going to help you evolve as marketers, how you can as a marketer put it to best of your use and become better at what you do. Overall, your job role, your job profile is going through a transformational shift, and you have to be at the forefront of this innovation and lead the change to make the world better with AI rather than being in denial or being fearful of AI taking over your job. So make sure you subscribe to 10x Marketer podcast because I keep bringing you great guests like Fred and Nava. And let's listen to what they have to share and how PPC would look like in 2025.
Delight to be here for the second time now with my PPC buddy and boss, Fred Vallaeys. Hey, everybody. Navah Hopkins. I'm the evangelist over at Optimizer, and I could not be more delighted to weigh in on what's in the future, but then also what are some lessons we can take from the past to inform a pragmatic future and a profitable one too.
And then for me, Giri, thanks for having me on again as well, second time. But really cool to be on with Nava. We always have good discussions usually between the two of us, so it's nice to maybe put this in front of an audience. And I'll probably come in a little bit more at the high level, the maybe not even the 2025 vision, but the vision beyond that, like what we really need to start planning for at some eventual point. And then Nava's really good at sort of bringing that back to maybe something a little bit more immediately tactical. So really curious to see where we go today.
That's awesome and so great. I would like your initial thoughts on how do you see things moving on with AI and everything else in between for PPC as a landscape.
Well,
Fred
I mean,
has
I'll
to take
start
that
with
first. Yeah.
exactly. I just sort of figured that. Let's start with the big vision here. Um, people overestimate the impact of radical changes in the near term and underestimate their impact over the long term. And so that's Amara's law. And so basically, I think we are at a stage now where our minds are blown by what Gen AI can do. But think back 30 years when the internet was invented, and 30 years before that when the microprocessor was invented. And if you think of 60 years ago when computers first came out, like people's minds were blown. It was amazing. But now you think of what those computers 60 years ago did in today's terms, like it's kind of a joke, right? They barely did anything. Like they couldn't store anything. We didn't have like high graphics, and the same with the internet. Like the internet was so basic 30 years ago, but at the time that it came out, it was like this mind blowing thing. So just imagine with Gen AI, and for as excited as we are about it today, like what will it make the future? And it's something that I think we can't even envision. But besides the things that I can't envision, I do have some specific thoughts around keywords, landing pages, conversions, so we can drill into each of those. But I'd love to hear what Nava has to think about sort of the broader future.
So it's interesting. This is one of the few topics where I actually do have that high level that high level thought, or that high level question, and there are some tactic pieces. My biggest concern is that the AI era, or what we all collectively are jumping in on the AI era, came out at the exact worst time because it's also the privacy first era. And AI requires a substantial amount of data in order to be useful. But at the same time, you have increasing regulation, increasing rules around what is allowed to be shared, the privacy piece. And if we don't have the data to feed the AI, are we going to end up with broken matching systems? We're going to end up with broken creative. So that is a concern I have. But I'm also very hopeful because I will say that AI has fully enabled and empowered advertisers to go beyond grunt work. I don't see grunt work anymore being the province of new hires. I think we can actually finally start treating new hires with respect and autonomy, and actually grow their creative and their analytical chops. Because instead of having to sit with spreadsheets for hours, they can ask really meaningful questions to ChatGPT, or even create GPTs to manage their client accounts. Fred has some brilliant ideas on how to use GPTs. But the other thing that's actually really interesting is that AI is not going to solve the problem of people not having a creative mind. AI will solve the problem of, it is really scary to format a video for all the various video channels, or AI is not going to solve the problem of you not having your business metrics in line, but AI will help you get ideas around forecasting, just to look at different market trends and pull various reports together. I will shamelessly plug Sidekick, the optimizer tool, of how it actually is able to help consolidate some of those different insights. But even if you're using your own GPT, you create your own bot to essentially pull in all that information and then come up with creative analysis. It's a really exciting time to be a PPC professional.
Great. So that's a good opening statement. Now let's talk about something very, very specific. Let's start with the campaign types. We right now we have 6 7 different campaign types, and then we have one campaign type that clubs everything into one, and then there's a lot of machine learning. I'm talking about the PMax campaign. And I see a lot of campaign, maybe they may get retired very soon and everything will be taken over by PMax. This is my personal opinion, obviously. What is your thought on how the future is going to be for different campaign types within Google Ads? And the follow up question onto the same is how AI overview is going to impact the way we see search campaign right now and the search campaign that is going to be in future.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to take it first?
Yeah, let me start with your second question, right? So you asked a lot of stuff there, but let's start with the AI overviews before we. So because I think let's look at it from the perspective of the consumer still out there looking for things, and our jobs as marketers is still the same. It's to connect with those consumers and to be marketers. But how we do that is going to change, and how we do that is partially changed because of how people approach their searches. And so one prediction that I have for the future is that the keyword is dying. And I think the keyword is dying because these AI overviews, these large language models, they basically start acting as the memory of the consumer that's doing searches. And so imagine you've got the Meta AI glasses, or you've got one of the little pendants that's constantly recording what's happening to you. Every meeting you go to right now is being recorded, right? But people are literally starting to have wearables that do the same thing in day-to-day life. And they have the glasses that can constantly record whenever, not constantly, but record whatever you're seeing. And so think of that, how that shifts things around when you have a thought and you're like, hey, I've been trying to redecorate my living room, and there's this sofa that I'd like to have, and sort of like you have to explain what it looks like, and that's how you do it through keywords. What if you could go back in the memory of, I was in New York a couple of weeks ago and I stayed at this hotel and I really liked the sofa that I saw, but I didn't really pay that much attention at the time, but I kind of remember it. And I can go back to this large language model and my glasses and my pin, and I can be like, you remember that sofa in this hotel that I stayed in New York? And it knows what hotel that was. It can look through its image database and it can say, oh, it looked like this. Then it can start doing stuff like Google Lens, where it actually then connects you with that product. But the way that you got to doing that search is so radically different. So I think that is one big driver in how we're going to start treating campaign types differently and how we target things differently, because it's just the way that the consumer is going to get to that thing that they want very differently. And Microsoft has really good data about that. So Microsoft, when the Copilot runs alongside the search, the click-through rate of the ads for that Copilot experience is actually higher than those same ads in the non-Copilot experience. And so that kind of backs up this whole point that I'm making, which is the AI knows you better than just your search behavior on Microsoft. And because it knows you better, it's able to show better quality, relevant ads, and it gets a higher click-through rate. But then what's really surprising is that even though people get what they need faster, Microsoft has also seen that people spend more time after they've already clicked, but they come back and they continue having a conversation and they go deeper. And that's sort of my second prediction, is that the landing page is dead, because the landing page, yeah, it's great because you put it together and you put on what you want people to know about your product. But oftentimes the summarization capabilities of the LLMs are so great. And so that's another big shift in how we think about, well, what should be in a campaign. Like, what's the purpose of a landing page? What's the purpose of a keyword? And maybe it's more of a shift towards audiences. And I know Navah has a lot of thoughts on that. But I think that's sort of like from the AI overviews and Copilot experience, how I think things are going to change. And maybe I'll let Nava take what she thinks as far as the campaign type changes.
Well, it's actually really interesting. One of the reasons that Optimizer did the big data studies looking at PMax and the different campaign types is that there was a genuine fear amidst the PPC industry that, oh my goodness, the PPC or landscape is totally shifting. We're going to have zero control. It's going to be terrible. And what actually came out in the data is that when you run PMax alongside your siloed campaigns, the siloed campaigns and PMax together actually did better than accounts that didn't have the PMax present. And the beautiful thing about PMax is that it's bias-free budget allocation. Now, I actually, and I've put this forward several times politely, that advertisers should be allowed to put weighting systems around where your budget goes. And one of the best controls at your disposal when you're thinking about communicating with Google or really any ad network is conversion values. And this kind of goes back to my earlier point about AI and privacy came out at the worst possible times, because if you don't have your conversion tracking and you can't fully see all of those numbers, a little harder to communicate. But provided that you can feed in those numbers, especially with offline conversions or enhanced conversions, you definitely do want to put in those values to tell Google, tell Microsoft, tell Meta, this is more useful, this is less useful. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and we kind of teased this in the pre-podcast talk, the looming DOJ decision where they're contemplating not only asking Google to sell off Chrome, but to also potentially share all or share and use no keywords. If that comes to pass, that will not only be the death of the keyword, that will be the death of the negative keyword. So as much as we might all love our keywords and the idea of targeting specifically this one way of searching, I think it's actually much more useful to get used to the idea that there is a general idea of people that I like. They visit these sorts of sites, they engage with content in this sort of way, and I am going to target the general ideas they go after, not the specific keyword concepts. And I also, the other mechanic to this with audiences, there is more to PMax than audiences. In fact, PMax uses no audiences. You cannot outright target with PMax any audience you want. You actually can only exclude audiences that you don't want to see your ads. Demand gen, which you didn't ask about, but I'm going to insert into the conversation, does allow you to outright target. So I think we all have kind of, PMax has been talked about. It's kind of at this point not new. It's just a standard campaign type. Demand gen is, in my opinion, the more interesting one, because demand gen has that semblance of PMax where you are leaning into the AI, you're kind of letting Google figure out what is the best allocation of your budget, but it still does allow you to outright target. And I think that campaign type is the future, where there's that symbiosis between human business acumen and AI and with privacy minded automation.
Great. So now I think you answered part of my the next question, but I would still put it to across to Fred, because he put a very futuristic vision of how PPC is gonna look like. What levers will PPC professionals and agencies have when the future that you enlisted for us is realized uh, in actual sense? That's the part one of the question. Part two, which is even more interesting, is the vision that you put is much more realistic for a D2C or an e-commerce brand. But what happens to B2B and lead generation campaign in such a scenario?
I'm actually curious before we get to answering the
Sorry.
question. Oh, go ahead.
Gary, your audio is really low.
Is it?
And I see Nava's waveform showing up, but I don't see yours or mine. So I want to make sure that your audio is going to be good.
Yeah, I think I can hear
You're
my
good?
own
Okay.
audio perfectly,
Okay, cool.
so we
You're a
can
little soft on
continue.
my end compared to Nava, but if it's fine, it's fine. Nava, go ahead.
So, I
Lost the
totally forget what I
thoughts.
was going to say. Sorry. What was the question that you asked?
So the question was twofold again. The first part of the question is
Oh, I remember. I
what
remember.
levers?
B,
Yeah.
the B2B in enterprise, I'm really surprised that you feel that it doesn't cover B2B in enterprise. I'm going to, again, shamelessly plug the data that we pulled because Optimizer has a lot of accounts connected. So we have the privilege and the ability to look at wide trends. Using conversion values and actually sharing those conversion values is not exclusive to e-commerce and D2C. We actually found that the majority of our customers, especially that did well with a maximized conversion value and that shared those conversion values, were in fact lead gen B2B businesses. So it's not that I think that's a really bad habit that we all got into of thinking that conversion values are exclusive to e-commerce. In fact, when you come up with conversion values for the different types of stages in the customer journey or the different types of ways that people engage with you, whether it's through your site, whether it's talking through your salesperson, that's a very real way to communicate the value of the conversion. So I think everyone, if you go into 2025 with one thing, get it out of your head that conversion values are just for e-commerce, because they're not. All right. And
Okay,
now we
let
can go
me
to the actual questions.
let me
Yeah.
rephrase the question then. It was not about the conversion value. I understand that, and I think this is something that we discussed in our last episode also. My
Yeah.
question was slightly different. The vision that Fred is trying to put in, where you're not searching any keywords, you're just looking at your memories, and then you're coming up with a product that you need from an e-commerce store. Where does B2B fit into that vision?
Well, Gary, I just want to like maybe talk first about when the keyword is gone. What does that mean? Okay. So there's this other fairly recent news where Perplexity can now do the conversion for someone. So Perplexity, an AI search engine, you can find the thing you need, but then you'd still have to go to the landing page and you'd have to fill out the form, put in your credit card, buy the thing. So now they've just announced that they can do that for you. They can, using their Gen AI, it can look at the page, it can understand the form fields, and it'll stick in the right information. And when I heard that news, I thought it was such weird news because it's basically like that's what APIs on the internet have been doing for decades. They connect systems to systems. And so then if you want to think about like the fact that the human has to go and fill out a landing page, like that's been a stopgap solution. But the future vision is that, well, my agent, my large language model agent knows me and it knows my credit card. And if I tell it that I want to buy something, like, why do I have to go and fill out a form? Right. So it's cool that it can go and fill out the form. But really, what I think is going to happen very soon is that the advertiser's website is going to have something like an API that talks directly to the LLM, and that's for OpenAI. That's called an action. So you can build actions in these systems. And so think about that now. Kind of think about keywords. While keywords have been that same similar stopgap solution of me filling out a form field, because that's really what search is, right? It's a single form field where I have to put in some way of trying to explain what it is that I want because I got something in my mind and I have to somehow connect that to all of these advertisers that may provide that. Now, LLMs are really good at looking at your landing pages and your content and your product descriptions, and they vectorize the whole thing. They put it into a semantic database. And so if my LLM like taps into my mind and starts to understand what it is I want, then I don't have to quantify it through this stopgap solution of a silly keyword that hardly explains all the nuance of what I really wanted. Right. So I think we're actually going to get to a better place. And what it means for advertisers is focus on your content. And even though I said landing pages are dead, I didn't say content was dead, right? You still need to help the LLM understand what it is that you provide. And one of the biggest challenges for LLMs into 2025 and 2026 and beyond, there's two of them, Number one, there's not enough power in the world to like keep building these models without you having to shut off your air conditioning because the LLM wants your power, right? And they're building new nuclear reactors. They're bringing them back online. So, and a lot of legislation is going to have to figure out what happens there. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is they're running out of content to absorb so that they can become better. So our jobs as marketers is like, well, explain what your product is. Why is it better? What does it do? And so the LLM can ingest it and can have a better conversation with the prospective customer. And through semantic search, like the customer doesn't have to quantify the keyword anymore, but it actually, the LLM finds you the better solution. And so that's a really positive view of the future, right? Where the keyword, which I know we've come to love dearly, but ultimately ask yourself the question, why? And it's back to that point of like, our goal is still the same. Our goal is to sell stuff to the people who could benefit from it. How we do it, that's different. And the keyword may no longer play such a big role in that.
So there are
But
two things I
yeah,
want to
sorry,
share. Oh,
continue,
go
Nava,
ahead. Go ahead.
please. No, you can continue. I'll make my point later.
There are two things I want to share in support of Fred's point. One is a story about how I actually purchased and engaged in what I would consider a keyword free world. And the other is about actually some fun Brighton SEO sitting next to the right people conversations. So the first is, which by the way, shamelessly plug for Brighton SEO and HeroConf, really glad that they're back. I was sitting because I had this amazing time traveling the world, sharing optimizer information at a lovely cafe in Cologne. And we were sitting drinking Turkish coffee, and an industry friend said, you can actually have your coffee cup read. Like you can have like tea leaves reading, and they like coffee cup reading. I'm like, this is interesting. I'm curious. And I pull open my Google Play to like check out like, okay, what like is this real or what's going on? And there were a number of apps. I then go to my ChatGPT and I check to see like, is coffee reading legit? And I actually saw sources from the apps that I was looking at. So it was ChatGPT isn't just a method to find information. It can also help you back up with some of that indexed, knowledgeable, useful content. I mean, yes, bring that human mind, but it was very interesting. And my checkout process, granted this is an app, but I can tell the same story about Talk Notes, which is a great app Fred got me to start using, which is not quite dictation. It's just, it helps with the process. I paid for both that app to read my coffee and Talk Notes with my Google Wallet. So I did not need to fill out a form. I did not need to do any of that. But what I did need to do is be presented with an option of customer information. So I think the landing page form is going to transition from a series of required fields to sell you to here's your customer profile, that if you're willing to share this information, amazing. Otherwise, you're just an email in our system and we know that this is what your subscription is and that's that. The other thing that I wanted to share, and then we can move on, is I had the great pleasure of sitting next to Fabrice Cannell. He's the head of Bing, and he was sharing how one of his greatest delights is seeing how much people are focusing on getting indexed on Bing over Google, because GPT uses as a more often than not Bing content or content that's indexed on Bing than Google. And so this is a not so subtle call for folks to pay attention to Microsoft, pay attention to Google, and that it's not even the death of the keyword that I'm worried about. It's I would like for people to not continue to do things habitually. I'd like people to think about how can I achieve the best outcome? And if you're working through getting your content indexed on Bing, you might actually have an easier time being found through all of those different AI systems. To be fair, Gemini is great. Google is still a lovely system, and the AI overviews are very helpful. But there are other solutions out there, and people will vote with their wallet, with their eyeballs. And now I relinquish my mic.
Now I have a point, and then I don't want to forget the question that I have in my mind. I was also looking at Meta AI on WhatsApp to search some of the local content, and then I checked the Bing results. It directly correlates to what is appearing in Bing search engine for a local search that I'm doing in a city in India. So I think it's not just Chat GPT. The Meta AI is in a huge way dependent on Bing search results, according to my searches. Maybe you can check and relate to that. The next question that I think lost in the entire conversation is, and I'd put it in a slightly different way. I have spent half of my life excluding negative keywords and putting them into an exclusion list. If everything is done automatically by Google, what should I do as an individual? Like, where should I go? Should I go back to farming and leave entire PPC world, or is there a way for me to get upskilled and still be relevant in the industry?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're asking us questions about the future here, and the future that we're painting is certainly still at least a couple of months away. So I think you're good for now. But we can also bring it back to Performance Max, right? So even with Performance Max, they're reintroducing negative campaign level keywords for that. They have brand inclusions and brand exclusions. And I think this is a fairly recent announcement, but Ginny mentioned at HeroConf that instead of PMax always trumping the standard shopping campaign and search trumping PMax and sort of like all of these trumping rules, that it is now going to use ad rank, which then basically means it's going to be the bid is the differentiator. So if you have coverage for something on both sides, it's going to be the bid that determines it. Nava, what are your thoughts?
So this news actually came out October 12th, and I had to give my PMax talk in SMX London. I think it was the 24th. Um, I cannot overstate how polarizing the news was and how nothing burger in terms of actually outcomes it played out to be. So again, one of the reasons why I think it's really important that people take a step back before they post or before they panic or before they scream in the streets is it is a predisposition to post negative content or to engage with negative content because that tends to do well in social media. It tends to get more traction. What actually ended up happening for most marketers when they looked at their PMax campaigns and their shopping campaigns, because ultimately ad rank, as Ginny said, is just the bid. If you didn't bid aggressively, which most people don't do on their standard shopping campaigns because they typically have those very set rules, the standard shopping campaign wasn't going to do anything. The PMax campaign was just going to win because it would have the higher bid. If you had actually structured yourself to have all of those different levers of control, then your standard shopping campaign was actually able to deliver better results because it no longer had to take a backseat to PMax. It actually was able to be present in those auctions where you needed to have the shopping campaign specifically. So I think one of the reasons that news is a good kind of case study of how we as marketers need to maybe revisit how we interact with news is we've been so conditioned to believe the worst possible outcome, that every single thing is going to be a bad day or it's going to make us waste money. This was actually something, in my opinion, that was net beneficial for advertisers. And those that actually were running both did see either flat or better results. Now, on that note of what's it called? So the news that we consume and kind of what is, well, not even the news that we consume, like what is the future of marketers? I mentioned earlier conversion values. The most important things we as marketers can do to to be relevant is get good at data integration. Make friends with your data scientists. If you don't have a data scientist, make friends with GPT and ask them data scientist questions, because that's a really useful way to look at the information. The next really important piece is creative. We are not allowed to hide anymore behind, oh, we just pull levers in analytics. Like, we actually need to be creative marketers. And then the final piece is actual business strategy. PPC for a really long time got to just hide in a hole and not be accountable for, like, can you actually handle more customers right now? What operational changes need to happen to enter into this market? And I think the average PPC is actually going to become that much more useful because they're going to be marketers. They're not going to just be one subset of marketing that does one specific thing. That said, as Fred said, the future we're painting is at least several months away. So you don't need to panic, but you do need to give yourself grace to learn, but use the time to learn.
There's different stages to this, right? So I think when we think about ad creative, headline generation, keyword generation, we're looking at generative AI can do some of these things. It can help us become more efficient. And ultimately, yes, it may get to a place where we don't need to do these things anymore. But I challenge everyone to think different. And, this was obviously the Apple slogan from many, many years ago. But in the age of Gen AI, I think, like, broaden your mind, because the things that in the past you didn't even consider as a possibility, like, now they are possible. Either GPT can teach you how to do it, or GPT can do a lot of it for you. And so I am now a graphics designer. I became a good statistician. Like, these are not things that I was in the past, but thanks to GPT, I can actually dabble in this and I can learn it and I can become pretty good at it. And then the other thing is, don't be so stuck in the old ways of, like, the keywords and the ad text. Like, think back of what is your mission? What was it you're trying to achieve? Like, we are trying to connect consumers to relevant businesses and generate sales for those businesses. And that doesn't have to go through a keyword. That doesn't have to go through an ad text. And yes, for now it does, but, like, think different. What would be a legitimately better experience, right? And so it's the same thing in SEO. When somebody says, like, am I optimizing to be, like, highly ranked on Google or Bing? Like, at the end of the day, like, these systems, they do track what is useful to society, what's adding value. And so you may not be the winner in the super short term. Those might be the people gaming the system. But in the long term, you're going to be better off just figuring out creative new, and Nava said it, right? Creativity, that's the human skill that we still bring. So put some constraints on the large language models, get them to be creative with you, and come up with something radically new that's going to be so much better that everybody's going to be like, oh, Girdharee's agency, that's the one I want to work with. Or Fred's agency or Optimizer, that's where we want to go.
Okay, so the second part of this question is, let's say you are able to find a roadmap and upskill yourself. One, this is a myriad of AI tools, so there's no limit to which tool or how much you can learn. That's one. And the other part is there a way you can train your own GPT or own AI, which you can take with you when you go for your next interview?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll take that one because I know Nava already said I do some cool stuff with GPTs. So, yeah, absolutely. So on Gemini, they're called GEMs. On GPT or OpenAI, they are called GPTs, very confusingly, but these are custom GPTs that you can build. Claude has them as well. And so I think I even said this on the last podcast I was on with you. But every agency, every person should be building their own GPTs. And as an agency, it makes sense because you can have a GPT that's sort of trained on the sensitivities of each client. And what is it that each client sells? Are they lead gen? Are they e-commerce? If they're lead gen, what is it exactly that they sell? And so this is in the vein of think different. Like, if you're going to use GPT to write a report for a client, I mean, yeah, that's kind of cool that it explains what the CTR is and why the CTR might have gone up. But what if you train that GPT that this client sells eyewear, sunglasses, primarily in the United States with a couple locations in Europe. And now when it generates the report, it's going to explain an improvement in CTR by explaining that, hey, maybe you had a more relevant keyword like the latest Meta View sunglasses, and that's what was causing your boost in CTR. So it starts making all of these outputs so much more relevant. And I think that's a really powerful way to use GPTs. The other way that
I
I like
do. Sorry.
Yeah, so the other way that I like using GPTs is to make them adversarial. So I have multiple GPTs all with the same end purpose. So when I write a blog, I have a team of 5 GPTs. One of them is a very skeptical reader. One of them is someone who's very focused on fact checking what I write. One of them is a CMO level reader, so they care about like high level, big picture. I've got one reader, a GPT, that impersonates a more junior account manager. And so I pit all of them against each other, and I basically give them the same blog post. And I say, each of you, like, tell me what you think and talk to each other. And then there's a final GPT that looks inside that memory that's being built by all of these GPTs talking to each other. And it spits out, like, here's the 5 things that from all of these conversations between the GPTs, what you should actually worry about, Fred. Here's the things that you should take back and go and make better in this article. So that's another way I use it.
So this looks like a scene from a sci-fi movie. Can an average Joe like me do it without worrying about all the
A little
technicality
Minority
of
Report.
building a GPT?
Yeah, so I mean, building a GPT is not difficult, right? If you just basically go to OpenAI to the GPTs on the top right, where you have the GPT directory. If you're on the right subscription plan, you can just say plus create my own GPT. And it's quite easy. I mean, you just start by, like with any GPT, explaining what you want it to do, how to act, what kind of words you like including, not including. And then the other cool thing is you can attach knowledge. So you can attach a number of files to give it a grounding. So you can. So what I've done in one of my GPTs is I've given it the books that I've written, and so that becomes the grounding. So now you can have a conversation with a virtual version of myself and talk to me about, why did I put some of these things in the books, or how do these topics apply to you? And you have that conversation with a virtual version of myself. So that's the other thing. And then you can also build custom actions. So the example that I gave, where you no longer have to get the user to fill out a form field. Sort of my favorite example to give here is say that your open table. Well, if you have a restaurant recommendation GPT that you built, you can actually tie it directly into your own database of availability and the booking engine. And you do that through what's quote unquote an action. And an action is basically just teaching OpenAI and GPT how to speak the language of your APIs. So you give it your API documentation and it figures out which API with what inputs to call for each scenario. And Optimizer has done this. We call that Sidekick. So you can come into Optimizer and you can ask any question about your account. And because GPT knows how to talk to our systems, it uses the right API call to fetch the data. And the answers it gives are grounded in the reality of your account. And so that makes it tremendously more useful.
The one thing I wanted to add to the conversation, because Fred covered most of it. Again, everyone follow Fred for all the AI. One of the things I've started to like doing with GPT and other AI platforms is actually doing branding checks. So I have what I have coined an adorkable brand, like authentic, nerdy, passionate, like geeky, whatever. And so I'll every once in a while check in with ChatGPT, with Gemini, with Claude, with Perplexity, and see, is Navah Hopkins smart, or is Navah Hopkins nerdy, or what are the topics that you can learn from Navah Hopkins. And it's useful for me to see from each AI system, where am I meeting my brand and where am I not? And you can apply this to your own brand. So plugging in Optimizer. Optimizer's whole thing is democratizing enterprise level technology for everybody, unleveling the playing field through automation layering, PPC insurance. And so if you have certain branding briefs that you need to meet, AI is actually a really great check to see how well are you meeting those briefs. Because the traditional search in Google or in Bing is not going to tell you that. You're going to get a whole bunch of articles. But just getting that quick answer is actually super, super useful. And if you're not meeting it, it'll give you a sense of, okay, maybe I need to talk a little bit more about this so that I'm meeting my brief.
And how do you fix that part if you're not meeting that expectation?
You change your content. You revisit what you're talking about. So, for example, there was a time when I was emphatically known about keyword theory. Like that was all I talked about. But as platforms evolved, I stopped talking about keyword theory. So even though At the time, I was an adamant team stag versus team scag, single theme ad groups versus single keyword ad group person. At this point, it's not useful for me to talk about. Instead, it's much more useful for me to talk about PPC and SEO. And that's one of my core branding concepts. And so I've just been much more aggressive about pitching those topics, writing that content.
And there's two things in what Nava said, right? So one of them is getting it to suggest the topic so that you kind of like steer back in the direction of what you want. And then I think the other thing was it adorkable? What
Yes.
was it? So then if you're like adorkable is the tone of voice that I'm going for, then you can literally just have a custom GPT whose
Mm-hmm.
job it is to read your content and make sure that it hits like that adorkable level that you need. Um, so that is a fun experiment, like Nava saying, like just give it a couple of your blog posts and say, what is my tone of voice? And one of the guys who was also at the conference, Andrew Locke, he came back and it says something like you're pretty aloof, or it was like it was not a positive, but he's got tons of readership, and for him it was interesting to kind of like see how the AI perceived his style of writing,
Mm-hmm.
because the mistake was when he was using GPT to help him craft his writing better. He thought, well, like I'm very approachable and I'm warm and I'm all of these things, and so he said, like, write a warm and approachable article about this topic, and then what came out of it didn't have his voice at all. He was like, yeah, it's not that good. It doesn't really sound like me. But until he asked, like, what do you think I sound like? He didn't know how to quantify that and tell the system to write more in that voice. And so that's the very easy step that anyone can take to sort of understand. And then you can also say, like, I really respect Nava, I really respect Fred. So you give it our stuff, and then you're like, how do I write more in that tone? Like, what should I do? And that's where GPT is such a fantastic teacher, right? Like, you can almost ask it anything and be like, hey, I already know a little bit of French, but take me to the next level. Right? Make me a better writer. I already know a bit of statistics, but like this is where I struggle. Help me with that. And unlike so many traditional courses and help materials that you do, which you have to start from the beginning and sort of learn the stuff that maybe you already know to eventually get to the stuff you wanted to learn about, GPT, you can just drop in at any stage you're at and get it to help you out with better branding, better learning, whatever it is.
Great. So I think we are already more than 40 minutes in the episode. I'm not sure if you both realize. I didn't realize that. I just looked at the clock right now, timer. Uh, any parting thoughts before we kind of conclude the episode?
Keep hope. There is a lot of really exciting, wonderful things happening. And if you give into despair and stress, you're letting the mind gremlins win. The only thing that's getting in the way of you winning and succeeding in the AI era and the privacy first era is that you're unsure of what's going to happen. And the way you solve that is by learning. And you're doing that right now because you're investing the time in a podcast.
And I've been called a tech optimist. I love technology. Um, so I'm always looking for how do I apply it to make my life better, and that extends beyond PPC. So I've done things like I've used large language models and Zapier to take my emails about my three kids and what they're doing in school and summarize those emails and turn it into a text to speech and automatically put it into a podcast, which I can listen to in the car on the way to work, so that I'm never like missing things and my wife gets angry at me because she's like, why did you not know that this was going on? Right. So but it's like all of these crazy cool things that you can do with technology, whether they're in PPC, digital marketing, or just making you a better and more effective person. Like that's what inspires me. But I'll also say that I've never been as mentally stressed in my life as I think I am right now, because there just are so many possibilities. And even the fact of keeping up with what's Claude doing, what's Gemini doing, what's OpenAI doing, what's Meta's AI doing, if you try to keep up with it all, your head's going to explode. So I've just latched onto one of these. I've mostly GPT, because I've sort of started to see that they all leapfrog each other, but they eventually all go to the same place. So it just helps me have a more calm mind, have cool technology, and not get too distracted by the multitude of other things that are happening, which are eventually all going to come into the platform that I use as well.
Okay, can I share my thought on this? So I think my take is, rather than worrying about what is happening on all the tools, you have to think about what job I'm doing right now, or what job I'm planning to do in, let's say, next 2 years, 3 years, and how the AI can help me do my job better. And then whatever tools or technology you need within the AI to do your job better, get better at what you're planning to do, that would make much more sense as an individual, those who want to get employed and do their job better. And even as an agency, you know your direction and how GPT and AI can help you do your job better. I think if that is the focus, then maybe you have a better chance of staying focused and not being worried about what is happening on tool A, B, C, D, because that will be very difficult to track. One of the difficulty that is created because of these AI tool is, earlier we were relaxed on focused only on Google. Now there are so many goalposts to focus on.
Completely agree with all of that.
Thank you so much, guys. Anything else you want to share? I just want to end this with a promise that we will maybe record another episode in December 2025 and revisit what we have shared now, so that we can perhaps compare our notes.
We'd love to show you next year how we were right on everything we predicted today.
Great. So maybe next time
Thanks,
I'll
Gary.
not
We'll,
make.
we're spun right. We'll spin it right.
Hopefully next year, the AI will be able to do a better job of blocking the calendars of both of you, and we'll not have the kind of confusion we had today. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you for listening, guys. This was a fantastic chat, and we'd love to see how much of this comes true in 2025. Thank you so much, both of you, and we are hopeful for a great future for all of us. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.